This is the story of Lisa and Mark, a married couple living in a quiet neighborhood just outside the city. They had a 5-year-old son named Ben, a quiet little boy with wide eyes and a habit of staring a little too long at things that didn't seem interesting. Lisa was a full-time mother, gentle and patient, always busy around the house, while Mark worked night shifts as a nurse at the local hospital. Their life appeared normal. Meals at the dinner table, bedtime stories, weekend walks in the park. The kind of life people look at and say, they've got it all together. But something began to change one autumn evening, when the wind outside was unusually loud and the moon seemed too bright for comfort. Lisa had just put Ben to bed and settled down with a cup of tea, letting the baby monitor hum softly beside her. Around 2:30 in the morning, the monitor crackled with static, followed by a sound that made her freeze. At first, it was just a whisper. Then another voice joined in, low, calm, not quite human. The voices were hard to make out, but the tone was unmistakably secretive, like two people trying not to wake someone. Lisa listened, her breath caught in her throat, as the deeper voice said something that made her blood run cold. "No, don't tell her. She won't understand." Her instincts kicked in. She rushed down the hall and opened the door to Ben's room. The light from the hallway spilled inside, revealing her son asleep in bed, undisturbed. The room was silent. The closet door was shut. Everything looked normal. She stood there, confused, unsure whether her mind had played tricks on her. Maybe the monitor had picked up another frequency. Maybe it was a neighbor's baby monitor bleeding through. That night, Lisa barely slept. The next day, she told Mark about it over the phone, but he laughed it off and blamed it on static or stress. Still, the unease didn't leave her. Something inside her had shifted. That moment when she heard a stranger's voice in her son's room in the middle of the night wouldn't stop replaying in her head. It was small, yes, but it was the beginning. And sometimes, the beginning is all it takes to pull someone into a story far darker than they could ever expect. What Lisa didn't know then was that she had just opened a door, one that wouldn't be so easy to close again. The whispers didn't stop after that first night. Every evening around 2:30 a.m. the same thing would happen. At first Lisa told herself it was just a fluke, a glitch in the monitor, or perhaps the wind outside causing interference. But as the days passed, the whispers became clearer. It was always the same two voices. Ben's soft, childlike murmur, mixed with a deep, unfamiliar tone. One voice sounded soothing, almost like it was trying to comfort him, while the other was firm and direct as if giving orders. Lisa tried to dismiss it, but a gnawing fear began to take root. The first time she heard the deeper voice saying, "No, don't tell her. She won't understand." She froze, unable to move or breathe. She ran to Ben's room, her heart pounding in her chest, but when she opened the door, she found him sleeping soundly, curled up in his blankets. Nothing seemed out of place. His little face was peaceful, the kind of innocence that should have put her at ease. But instead, it made her feel worse. What kind of imagination could make a child speak like that in his sleep? And who was the other voice? Lisa sat by Ben's bed, waiting for the next incident. She didn't know how she could explain the fear slowly creeping into her thoughts. Maybe the house was old, or maybe it was just the stress of parenting and the isolation of being alone so often with Mark working night shifts. Yet the whispers kept coming. Night after night she would lie awake, listening as the voices argued in a language she couldn't fully understand. Sometimes Ben's voice would respond with innocent questions like, "Who are you?" or "Why are you here?" But the answers that came back were even more unsettling. "You don't need your mother," the deeper voice would reply. "You don't need her anymore." One evening, after yet another sleepless night, Lisa decided to take action. She would check on Ben every time the whispers started, convinced that she was just imagining things. But one night, after hearing the voices. Again, she could no longer pretend it was all in her head. She entered Ben's room and was struck by a strange stillness. He was awake, sitting up in bed with his eyes wide open, staring straight ahead. She asked if he was okay, but he didn't answer. His gaze remained fixed on the corner of the room, where the shadows seemed to dance unnaturally. Lisa felt the chill in the air, her skin prickling. Then Ben, without looking away from the corner, said something that sent a shiver down her spine. "Mr. Long told me not to talk to you," he whispered, his voice distant and eerie. The unease that had been growing inside Lisa erupted into full-blown panic. Mr. Long. Who was that? She had never heard Ben mention anyone named Mr. Long before, but she could see it in his eyes. He wasn't himself. Something was happening to him. Something beyond her understanding. Something far more terrifying than she could have ever imagined. The whispers weren't just dreams or static. They were real. And they weren't just coming from the monitor. They were coming from Ben's room. Whatever was in there with him, it had taken an interest, and it wasn't going away. A few days later, Lisa found Ben sitting in the living room, surrounded by a mess of crayons and pieces of paper. He was drawing intently, completely silent, as if lost in his own world. At first, it seemed like any other day, Ben's innocent creativity taking shape on the paper. Lisa sat down beside him, trying to strike up a conversation, but Ben didn't respond. She watched for a moment, her eyes drawn to the sketch in front of him. It wasn't anything unusual at first glance, but as she leaned closer, a chill crawled down her spine. The drawing depicted a tall, shadowy figure, completely dark with no features, except for two hollow eyes. In the figure's hand was Ben's tiny hand, as if they were holding hands. She asked him who it was, hoping to brush off the discomfort she felt. But Ben, without even looking up from his drawing, casually answered, "That's Mr. Long. He lives in my closet." Lisa's stomach dropped at the mention of the name again. Mr. Long. The name Ben had spoken in the middle of the night, the voice that had been speaking through the baby monitor. The figure in the drawing was unlike anything Lisa had ever seen, something far more sinister than any imaginary friend. She felt a wave of unease wash over her, but she tried to remain calm. She asked, "What does Mr. Long want with you, Ben?" Ben's eyes drifted to the paper, his expression blank as he softly said, "He says I don't need you anymore. He says you'll be gone soon." Lisa's heart skipped a beat. She wanted to say something reassuring, to tell him it was just a drawing, just a child's imagination. But the way Ben spoke, so matter-of-factly, like an adult, made her skin crawl. She didn't understand what was happening, but she couldn't deny that something was very wrong. That night, she felt the need to take action. She knew she had to protect Ben. But what could she do when the threat seemed so invisible? She couldn't see Mr. Long. She couldn't even explain what was happening. After Ben had gone to bed, she went into his room, checking everything for signs of anything strange. She locked the closet door and pushed a chair against it, just in case. She figured maybe it would bring her some peace of mind. But even as she stood in the quiet room, staring at Ben, who was now sound asleep, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was lurking just out of sight. It was only when she glanced back at the closet door that she saw it. A tiny crack, barely noticeable, but enough to let her know that something had been moving in the room. The thought of it left her feeling hollow, as if the walls themselves were closing in on her. The feeling stayed with her, gnawing at her the entire night. It wasn't just the drawing. It wasn't just the whispers. Something about Ben had changed, and Lisa didn't know if it was him anymore, or if he had somehow become a vessel for something far darker. That night, she couldn't sleep, her thoughts racing, consumed by the image of that shadowy figure holding Ben's hand. The very idea of it made her sick. Yet, as she glanced over at her son, who was still peacefully asleep, She couldn't help but wonder if Mr. Long had been with them all along. And if so, what did it want with them? The next few days were filled with an unshakable tension that hung in the air like a storm waiting to break. Lisa couldn't stop thinking about the drawing, about Mr. Long, and the way Ben had spoken about him, so calmly, so strangely. She felt like she was losing her grip on reality, as if she were being pulled into something far darker than she could understand. One evening, when Mark had come home early from his shift, Lisa couldn't hold it in any longer. She sat him down, her hands trembling as she explained everything that had been happening: the voices on the baby monitor, the drawings, Ben's unsettling behavior. Mark, at first, had laughed it off, trying to ease her worries. He suggested that Ben was just going through an overactive imagination phase, that the whispers were nothing more than a technical glitch, that the drawing was just a strange coincidence. But Lisa wasn't convinced. The fear inside her only grew stronger as she tried to explain how real it all felt, how she could sense the presence of something sinister, something that was slowly wrapping itself around their lives. That night, after Mark had gone to bed, Lisa couldn't sleep. She lay awake, staring at the ceiling, listening to the silence that felt oppressive. The house seemed too still, too quiet, as if waiting for something. Around 2:30 in the morning, the whispers started again. She could hear them, faint at first, crackling through the baby monitor. It was the same two voices, Ben's innocent voice, followed by the low, unearthly tone of Mr. Long. Lisa's heart began to race. She sat up in bed, her body frozen, the words echoing in her mind. "You don't need your mother anymore." The voice was clearer now, more distinct. She couldn't ignore it. She grabbed the flashlight from her bedside table and rushed down the hall. When she opened the door to Ben's room, she found him sitting up in bed, staring at the corner of the room again, his eyes wide and unblinking. A chill ran down Lisa's spine as she saw that the closet door was now slightly ajar. She hadn't left it like that. "Ben, what's going on?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. Her son didn't answer, his gaze still fixed on the dark corner. For a moment, the room was silent, the air thick with tension. Then, in a voice that was not his own, a whisper came from the shadows. "You're too late," it said, the voice like gravel scraping against stone. Lisa's blood ran cold. She could feel the weight of the darkness in the room, pressing in on her. She turned toward the closet, her mind screaming at her to get Ben out of there. But her legs felt like they were made of stone. And then, without warning, the door slammed shut with a violent crash. Ben didn't flinch. He didn't even blink. Lisa ran to him, her heart pounding, and pulled him out of bed, holding him tightly in her arms. But it was no use. Ben didn't resist. He didn't cry. He just sat there in her arms, eerily calm, as if he were no longer her son. Lisa knew something was terribly wrong, but she had no idea what to do. She wasn't sure if the Ben she was holding was the same boy she had once known. Something had changed. Something was taking hold of him and she couldn't stop it. She didn't know how to fight something so invisible, so powerful. All she could do was hold on to him and pray that whatever dark force had claimed her son would release him before it was too late. The next day felt different, as if the whole world had shifted just slightly off its axis. Lisa couldn't shake the image of Ben sitting in that empty, lifeless stare. Mark had gone back to work, but Lisa couldn't bring herself to leave Ben alone. She spent the day pacing the house, checking on him constantly, watching his every move. Ben seemed quiet, distant, more so than ever before, and he refused to speak about what had happened the night before. Whenever Lisa asked about Mr. Long, his gaze would drift to the same corner of the room, and his lips would tremble, but no words came out. It was as though he had shut himself off from the world, locked inside a place that Lisa couldn't reach. The tension in the house was suffocating, and the fear kept gnawing at her, growing stronger with every passing minute. That night, As the clock ticked closer to 2:30 a.m., Lisa could feel it, the suffocating dread hanging in the air, thick and heavy. She tried to keep calm, telling herself that maybe, just maybe, it was all in her head. But deep down, she knew it wasn't. The whispers began again, this time louder, clearer. Lisa ran to Ben's room, her heart hammering in her chest. She flung the door open, and there he was, sitting up in bed, staring at the corner once more. His eyes were wide, but there was something different about them now. They were empty, void of the boy she had known. He didn't even look at her when she called his name. "Ben," she said, her voice trembling. "We need to leave. We need to go now." But it was too late. The door to the closet opened on its own, creaking with an unnatural slowness. The air turned cold, and the shadows in the room seemed to stretch and twist as though alive. Then the voice came again, deeper this time, as if it were coming from all around them. "You can't protect him," it whispered. "Not from me." Lisa's breath caught in her throat, her heart pounding so hard she could barely hear her own thoughts. She grabbed Ben's hand, but he didn't react. It was like he wasn't even there. The shadow in the corner began to take shape, growing taller, darker, like a figure made entirely of smoke and despair. The room seemed to close in around her. In that moment, Lisa felt a surge of desperation, something primal and raw. A mother's instinct to protect her child at all costs. She pulled Ben toward the door, but it was as if the room had become a trap, the walls closing in, refusing to let them escape. The figure stepped forward, its presence overpowering. Lisa could feel the cold, the darkness that seeped into her very bones. She wasn't sure what it was anymore. Was it Mr. Long? Something worse? But she knew one thing. It was not going to let them leave. Just when she thought it was all over, just when her body began to give in to the overwhelming fear, Ben whispered, his voice barely audible, "Mom, it's not Mr. Long. It's me." The words were soft, but they cut through Lisa's soul. She froze, her hand gripping his tighter. Her son's voice had returned, but the words were not what she expected. It wasn't just the voice of the child she had known. Something was terribly wrong. Lisa's world collapsed around her at Ben's words. "It's me," he had whispered, his voice almost unrecognizable. For a moment, she couldn't breathe. The chill in the room grew colder, the shadows darker. She pulled Ben toward her, but he didn't respond. His body was still warm, but his eyes, they were empty, hollow. Lisa could feel her heart racing, her mind spinning. What did he mean? Was it really him? Was he the one speaking, or was something else taking control of him? As the shadow in the corner of the room seemed to grow larger, the whispers became more intense. "It's not him you should fear," the voice hissed, its tone sending a wave of dread through Lisa's body. It came from all directions now, as if the very air around her was alive with malice. Lisa's instincts screamed at her to run, to get Ben out of the house, but her legs refused to move. The dark figure moved closer, and Lisa could feel its presence pressing in on her, suffocating her. Then, something shifted in the air. It wasn't just the dark figure, it was Ben. His body remained still, but the way he stood, his posture, his vacant eyes, it was like he was no longer there. Lisa had heard of possession, of dark forces taking over a person's body, but she never thought she'd experience it. Was this what was happening to her son? Was Ben really gone, replaced by something far more sinister? Desperation flooded through her. She needed to get through to him, to find some part of her son still inside. She reached out to him, shaking, him gently, calling his name over and over. But there was nothing, no response, no recognition. His gaze remained fixed, staring into the void, as if he was somewhere else entirely. That's when it happened. Ben's lips curled into an eerie, almost unnatural smile. The smile was empty, cold, and Lisa felt her stomach twist in horror. She could feel the darkness in the room growing stronger, feeding off her fear. She tried to hold on to her composure, but inside she was unraveling. Was Ben really gone? Was she too late? As the shadow continued to grow and swirl, Lisa suddenly realized that the real terror wasn't just the figure in front of her. It was Ben. The boy she had known and loved was slipping away, slowly being replaced by something that was neither human nor benign. She backed away, her breath coming in shallow gasps. Every step felt like it was taking her farther from Ben, and yet she couldn't leave. It was as if the house itself had trapped her, keeping her in this nightmare with no escape. In the next breath, the figure spoke again, this time directly to Lisa. "You had your chance," it said, its voice dripping with malevolence. "You failed him." The words cut through her like a knife. Lisa couldn't bring herself to accept. It couldn't believe that the boy she had raised, the child she had held in her arms, could have been overtaken by something so evil. But deep down, she knew. She was losing him. And as the shadow loomed over her, she realized there was no way out of this hell, no way to save her son. The darkness had already claimed him, and now it was coming for her. The house felt like a prison, its walls closing in tighter with each passing second. Lisa stood frozen in the center of the room, her body paralyzed with fear, her mind racing. The figure before her seemed to grow stronger, its dark presence nearly suffocating. It was as if the house itself had turned against her, trapping her in a nightmare from which there was no escape. Ben was no longer just her son. He stood before her, but his eyes were empty, his smile twisted, his very presence a stark contrast to the child she had once known. The whispers had become deafening, filling the room with their cold, menacing tone. Lisa couldn't tear her eyes away from Ben. He had become something else, something unrecognizable. The shadow in the corner had grown into a shape, a tall, looming figure, shifting and writhing like a dark storm. It wasn't just the room that felt alive. The air itself was thick with evil. The longer Lisa stared at Ben, the more she realized it wasn't him standing there. Whatever force had taken over him had stripped him of everything that made him her son. He wasn't just empty. He was filled with something far darker, something ancient and unforgiving. The realization hit her like a cold wave. Ben was gone. What stood before her wasn't him at all. The creature that had taken his place moved toward her, its steps soundless, gliding through the room as if it were floating. Lisa felt her heart pound in her chest, the air becoming heavier with each passing second. She wanted to run, to scream, but her body wouldn't obey. The creature reached out, and Ben's body, now a vessel for the dark force, opened its mouth to speak once more. "It's too late to save him," the creature whispered, its voice harsh, cruel, as if savoring her despair. Lisa wanted to scream, but no sound came. It wasn't just the fear that paralyzed her. It was the overwhelming sense of hopelessness. She was losing her son, and there was nothing she could do to stop it. She couldn't even recognize him anymore. The boy she had raised, the boy who had once clung to her, laughed with her, and called her Mom, was gone. What remained was a hollow shell, possessed by something far older, far more powerful. Her mind raced, searching for a way out. Her love for her son was all she had left, but it felt powerless against the dark force that had taken him. She wanted to pull him back, to shake him awake, to scream at him to come back to her. But it was no use. The creature's grip on him was too strong, its influence too deep. And as the figure loomed over her, she realized that there was no escape, no miracle waiting to save her or Ben. The darkness had already won. The shadows that had claimed her son were now closing in on her, tightening their hold. She wasn't just losing Ben. She was losing herself. With one last silent scream in her heart, Lisa felt the darkness swallow her whole, dragging her into a place where there was no light, no escape, and no hope. And then, everything went silent. The house, the shadows, the whispers, they were all gone. All that remained was an empty room and the faint, hollow echoes of a mother's lost love.